Welcome to the Glassbreaker Summit 2020. I'm Denise Kegler. Our series of one-on-one conversations comes to an end with this fantastic guest, Bryony Bouyer. Bryony leads the diversity and inclusion strategy at Hasbro, a multi-billion-dollar global play and entertainment company. Since starting this role in late 2018, Bryony has led the execution of the company's first ever performance-based diversity and inclusion goals in order to cultivate a successful and sustainable future for the business. Bryony began her Hasbro career in 1995, serving in a variety of roles in both the global brand and global consumer products divisions. During her 25-year career, Bryony has accumulated numerous achievements, including growing the company's Transformers consumer products portfolio to more than $12 billion in retail sales. Bryony currently serves on the board of the Charlton College of Business at the University of Massachusetts, Dartmouth. She is also a member of the Toy Association's Diversity Committee and an active member of the Women in Toy organization. Bryony received her BS in marketing, an honorary doctorate degree from the University of Massachusetts, Dartmouth, and her MBA from Bryant University. Now, let me wrap up Bryony's introduction by repeating one key career highlight. Bryony is the first head of diversity and inclusion at Hasbro, a multi-billion-dollar global corporation. Bryony Bouyer, welcome to the Glassbreaker Summit 2020. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Miss Denise. That makes me sound so amazing. Love it. Thank you for that.
Because you are, and you are a true glass breaker. So I'm so thrilled to have you here, and especially thrilled to have you wrap up this summit. So let's just get right to it, because I have so much to ask you about, especially where we are now, the landscape, the atmosphere of the country, of the world. You lead diversity and inclusion at Hasbro, very iconic, a very visible brand. How popular are you right now?
That's a really great question.
And how busy must you be right now?
Yes, it's in a word, it's been extraordinary. Obviously, extraordinary events have driven sort of an extraordinary response from many companies, including Hasbro. We've held so many, actually probably 15 listening sessions, global panels, executed multiple memos, social media posts, et cetera, but most importantly, we were building off an existing strategy. And I think that is such a key factor in this, because what you don't want to do is respond, or react, I should say. What you want to do is ensure that you are potentially accelerating a strategy that was already laid down, which, in a way, I think this was such a great move on my part, a year and a half, 2 years ago, not knowing obviously that this was going to happen, but somehow sort of this path is in my way, and then moving us forward.
Moving forward, for sure. Speaking of moving forward, I want to get to moving to the top. So you are, by most people's measure, maybe not by your own, but most people would say that you are at the top of your game, because you have achieved so much in your career. How'd you get there?
I think it comes down to something called value and the value equation. And yes, in many ways, it's about a strategic plan for a career. But I think if you focus on something that's much bigger than the career itself, and you focus on things like, what value am I giving to the company, and what value is the company giving to me? If that's the frame of reference that you start from, and that's the place that I've always started from, I think it takes you many places. So in terms of landing here, for me, the value equation in that moment 2 years ago was, I've done what I think I can achieve on the business side. I now need to go to a different place. For me, it was about aligning my primary job with my personal purpose and having those two things come together, and framing it to the company in such a way that it feels like it was adding value to them, but also very much so adding value to me.
it's interesting because as you know, lead a lot of workshops. So one of the workshops I lead with my clients is about something you sort of touched on, which is finding meaningfulness, finding fulfillment in your work. And a lot of people don't have it. And it's because they haven't done what you just talked about doing, combining your own passion with your professional work, your job, your career. And people who do that find more fulfillment, find more meaningfulness in their work. So you have managed to strike that balance and find both. But what do you think was about you and your drive that one made you realize that that was important and then made you actually go out and try to get it?
I think in terms of the tactics associated with this big issue of a value equation, for me, it was always about doing the next job, the one that was ahead of me. I don't think I've ever said the phrase, that's not my job. For me, and I've always been like this without realizing that I was planning a career, this was the job at hand. But when I looked up and looked around, if there was something that needed to be done, I would just do it without question. Once it didn't encroach in somebody else's world, then that may be off limits. But for me, it was ensuring that if I looked around a division or a group that I was in, and literally, if there was a gap, that thing wasn't sort of being done, then I'd go get it. And that, I think, has served me through the years. I can almost think of every step in every moment of my career. It's always been about the fact that I've gone ahead and done the job above and beyond what I'm currently doing.
Now, you clearly are one who did not settle for being in the mainstream of your career. You saw things, you saw opportunities, and you went for them. How important is it for professionals to map out and plan out their careers in order to get there? So you and I have known each other for a very long time. You talk about just now about when you saw something that needed to get done, you just went out and did it. I want to try to understand what role you believe planning out your career, what role that plays.
So again, you have to start with a plan, right? You have to have a plan for what it is that you want to do. The thing that many people might stumble on is, do I have the skills necessary to make that leap, to start a new business, to walk into a different field, to take that next job? More than likely you do. You just have to A, figure it out, and then B, more importantly, how do I communicate it in a way that people will get it? That I can talk myself into it, but can I talk somebody else into it or get them to understand it immediately?
When someone is struggling to really find out where they want to go, where they want to be, what their value is, what their passion is, what advice do you give them?
So most people have a sense. They have a very strong sense. They may not be able to articulate it right away. They may not be able to put words around it. It might be more of a feeling, as we call it, versus I don't have language for it yet because I've just got a gut feeling. But if you ask the right series of questions and just keep peeling the onion, but why do you want to do that? And what do you want to do there? And so eventually a light bulb will go off and someone will go, that's what it is that I'm trying to do.
And I do find that as well with clients, and it is that I call it the peeling back the onion. Just every time you peel back a piece of it, you just dig deeper and deeper. And to your point, they don't always realize that this is the industry, the career, the area that would make them happy until you start digging down and having them discover their why.
Right. And having them discover it is so much more effective than you tell them what it is.
Yes. And I think more effective and more empowering when they recognize that they actually have more power than they think they have. They just need help discovering it and leaning into it. Do you see that as well? Do you find that as well?
100%. 100%. I think empowering is probably a better word than even effective. And again, I'm just going to keep going back to most people with conversation and with a series of questions will get to where their heart already is. They're potentially just hurdles that they perhaps put in their own way to even see what's right in front of them.
Yeah, and speaking of hurdles, what hurdles do women, well, let me back it up. Are there hurdles that you find that more women face, maybe put in their own way, or at
Yes.
least, you know, fine blocking their career path in people of color, underrepresented groups? Do you find that we have more hurdles than majority
Yes.
groups?
I do think that there are certain hurdles that women and underrepresented employees have, but I don't think we imagine it or we were born with it. I think signals have been sent to you all along, right? This is an issue of, what's the right word? It's been happening to you. You've been sent a signal. So it's not like you were born feeling like, okay, I shouldn't apply for that job. What's happened over time is that you've watched your counterparts go after something and get knocked down. It isn't just on the woman to quote unquote fix it. It's to ensure that our systems are fair, they're rigorous, and that we're being very specific about the leadership skills that we're looking for. And then that we're sending the right signals to women to say, hey, by the way, Denise, you might want to apply for that job, or you might want to start that business, or whatever it is. You may have to start tapping people because you've got to uncondition what's been conditioned in the person over time.
And absolutely, and not just the woman, but the structure, the culture around her, because
around them.
Exactly, because it could be, she could be retrained, reprogrammed, her mindset could shift, but if she's alone in that, it's not going to work.
So it's not I'm just going to keep saying it, it's not a female thing, it's not a Black thing, it's a cultural shift that has to happen at all aspects of any organization.
And how do we, you, me, in our roles, how do we work with corporations that higher levels of the corporation? Because it's a top down, as people say. Yeah. How do we get there to get them to understand that in order for that cultural shift to actually happen, they have to lean in and buy into that? Yeah,
I think in a very tactical way, it has a lot to do with your talent management system. And again, that's language for a larger company. That basically, so I mean, you've been in a large company before. A lot of these promotions, hiring of people has a lot to do with relationships, right? And men naturally have built-in sponsors to the relationships that they have with their counterpart. And so a position comes up and naturally we go, hey, you know what? I think Bert would be great for that job. But you haven't looked at Betty or another Bert to say, let us step back, think about what's required for that job. Let's look in our talent management system to see who we identified as pivotal talent. And let's ensure that we're evaluating each of these people fairly and equally. That's what we have to fix, is the fairness in the talent selection process, period.
And on that note, we talk about that particular area of a company. How much are these companies recognizing the need to invest in career development programs, for instance, for underrepresented employees?
I think many companies, including my own, have put out very public statements about ensuring that we've got a balance, a gender balance at all levels of leadership. And that's really key, to set out with an absolute goal, by the way, by a specific time, like 2025 in our case, or whatever year, it's a very specific KPI. And then you got to work like hell to get there, because we know for sure, and we've seen the data, that we start up, with a pretty wide funnel with women. And in many cases at the lower levels, I'd say you probably have more women than men. But for whatever reason, men tend to advance a lot faster. So you got to look at why is that? And then if you look at women, we'll get to like that director level, mid-level, and then we fall off for a whole host of reasons. And there's lots of studies that are done about that. But I think most companies now recognize that they're going to have to fix that gap. And the only way to fix the gap is to fix your talent assessment process that I can do. Now, that might then include, hey, listen, for man, woman, Black, white, whatever it is, there are some training gaps that both sides of the equation needs. So once we've identified that pivotal talent, you then have to say, based on the leadership skills that you've required, what gap do we need to go fix or close for that specific person? So we tend to do as corporations these major, large training programs, but not everybody needs the exact same thing. So it's becoming almost more customized to understand what your pivotal talent needs and then train accordingly.
On that note, it's a good time for us to take a short break to introduce my new career development online program, but we will be back in 30 seconds with more of our conversation with Bryony Bouyer, who's the head of diversity and inclusion at Hasbro. For now, you are watching the Glassbreaker Summit 2020. Even if you're not the next billionaire, laying out your mission, vision, actions, and metrics can help you reach your top-tier goal. At the end of your 10-week mainstream to top-tier journey, you will have your elevation strategy, a customized storybook that will help you keep your top tier in focus and progress on track. Create your elevation strategy. Elevate your career up and through the glass ceiling. Visit mainstreamtotoptier.com to learn more. Welcome back. You are watching the Glassbreaker Summit 2020. I'm Denise Kegler, and I am joined by Ms. Bryony Bouyer, who is the SVP of Diversity and Inclusion at Hasbro. Okay, Bryony, so let's go and talk more about your career switch. So what did you started your career, at least a big chunk of your career was in consumer products.
Yeah.
It is now in D&I HR. What was it? How did you know a couple years ago that you wanted to make that switch? And then what did you actually do to get where you are right now?
Okay, that's a really good question. So I had always dabbled, I used to call it my side hustle in D&I. I was the executive sponsor for Hasbro's Diversity Network back in 2014. And at the same time, I was sort of running consumer products and with a pretty significant global role. At some point, I started realizing that it was perhaps time to take on something that could fundamentally change Hasbro. I felt that while I might go down in history, yes, people might remember me in terms of developing new product lines, et cetera, the bigger leap that I could make is to fundamentally shift the organization and get us ready for the future. And when I say the future, I mean 20, 30 years from now. I recognize that we had a multicultural consumer base of people that are growing in the US, and there are brands perhaps weren't necessarily there. And in order to allow our brands to grow, we would need to ensure that we had a very diverse workforce. And my instinct was that if we combine those two things, that we might be able to move forward. So the question then becomes, okay, how do you go from that as a vision to pulling this together? I would say step one is A, understanding what you want. B, find someone that can help you think through the thoughts. And oh, by the way, when you go and ask someone for advice, just listen. Don't do the yeah, but, and da. Ask for the advice, have them give it to you, go back to your desk and say thank you very much, and then take the action. Sometimes we get it in our own way by thinking about it a little bit too much.
What would you say to a professional, maybe mid-year or mid-career or later in their career professional, who has the skills, has the talent, has the passion, but doesn't have the network to getting where he or she wants to go? What's the key to building that network?
You got to think about networking as if it's a job. It's a part of your job. And oh, by the way, as much as you are asking for something, you're also giving something. So perhaps if you frame it that way, it can mentally shift what networking is in your head. And sometimes you have to do things like that to make it authentic to you. Because if you got the kind of personality where it's hard to ask for something, frame it differently. Think about the fact that you're giving something and you're getting something. And then you also have to think, you don't have to build your network in one shot, right? You go off and you ask for a meeting with someone. You're very specific about what it is that you want from that meeting. You're really super clear. So think it through even before you reach out to understand what is it that I want from Denise or Brian or whomever it is, and be very clear and upfront and state that clearly. I've heard situations where people have said, I spoke to someone for an hour, and at the end of the hour, I still don't know what they wanted. So you've got to be very specific about that. And then once you've had that very direct conversation, and that person is giving you whatever advice it is that you're looking for, then ask them, who else would you recommend that I talk to? So given these 3 things that we've come up with, would you give me 3 other people that I'd like to talk to? And then do the same thing. You ask those 3 people, for 3 people, you get to 9, then you get to 12 and 14, etc. That would be the approach that I would take. Now, my network probably was built over a long period of time, but if you're starting from scratch, I think that's perhaps the fastest way of building it.
How does it feel to be a glass breaker?
I think you started off this conversation by saying, I don't know if I think about it in those terms. Because there's so many glass to be broken. There's always the next ceiling, right? I mean, at what point do you stop? Let's pretend you broke the glass ceiling until you became the president of the United States. Well, then you could do something greater. I mean, is there a bigger country that you've got? So it just goes on and on. So breaking the glass ceiling is perhaps your own sort of personal goal that you set for yourself in terms of how far you want to go and the balance that you want to strike, because it isn't only just about business. You may have a family situation. So what is that right place for you? So perhaps to me, the question is, how do I feel about finally getting to a place where I have aligned my primary job with my purpose? That feels really good.
Yeah, well said, well said. And something else I want to hear from you that I'm sure will be well said, which is a quote. I love quotes. I find them motivational.
I actually wrote it down.
So yes, I want you to share one of your favorite quotes with us.
The one that I love the most is from Obama. So I'm actually going to read it because I wrote it down. I want to do it justice because I always end up short forming it. But it's the one around change. It says, change will not come if we wait for someone or some other person or some other time. We are the change that we seek.
Yes, we are, which is what this whole Glass Breakers,
right,
sort of touches on that. Exactly. Touches on that.
We are the change that we seek.
Absolutely. And on that note, which is a very good note to end this interview or conversation with, thank you so much, Bryony Bouyer, for participating in the Glass Breakers Summit 2020. So great to sit down and talk to you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me on, and thank you for doing this for all the future Glass Breakers that are listening.
Yes, absolutely. And thank all of you for being here throughout this Glass Breakers Summit 2020. I do appreciate your time. Please join me tomorrow live at 8 p.m. on my Facebook group, Glass Breaker. I will break down the conversation we just had with Bryony Bouyer about D&I, but also talk about my program, Mainstream to Top Tier. I'll be answering your questions. So again, I hope to see you live at my Facebook group, Glass Breaker, tomorrow at 8 p.m. Eastern. Until then, be safe, be well. I'm Denise Kegler. Thanks so much for being here.